Hi everyone, this video is associated with the Introduction to Linux course that you guys are studying. It's based upon the Linux Essentials NetAcad course content. We're looking at chapters 1 to 4 on this particular video. So what are we looking at? Well, first 4 chapters of the NetAcad Linux Essentials course are Introduction to Linux, Operating Systems, Working in Linux, and then there'll be a discussion on open source software and licensing at the end. So, Introduction to Linux says here that Linux is everywhere. That is to say, it's an operating system that is used in a lot of different places, a lot of different devices, not just on things like web servers and email servers. You don't maybe see Linux quite so much on a desktop PC, but on saying that, that's just because Windows is extremely popular. If you've got an Android phone, that's Linux. If you've got a smart TV, that's Linux. If you're ever on an aeroplane, it's probably going to be run by Linux as well. It gets, as it says here, everywhere. So what is Linux? It's an operating system, or to be specific, Linux is the kernel of the operating system, the core of the operating system, the thing that makes it work. It's loaded at boot time and it stays running. And basically, it controls your computer. If you're running something like a tool, such as the terminal package, that attaches itself to the kernel makes everything work. The kernel is the core of the operating system. So, where did Linux come from? Where did this operating system kernel come from? Well, originally it came from something called Unix, which was an operating system that was written in the 1970s. But in the early 90s, specifically in 1991, an individual called Linus Torvalds decided to write his own version of Unix. And if you take Linus, the chap's name, and Unix and put them together, you get Linux. Now, Linux is basically the kernel of the operating system. So the rest of the operating system is created by something called GNU. And the GNU project was a collection of people that wrote different sorts of Linux/Unix tools, editors, compilers, user interfaces, etc. And you put them alongside the Linux kernel, and that's how you get your operating system to actually run. So your actual operating system is GNU and Linux combined. Linux is open source. And the whole idea of the open source philosophy is it means you can access the software source code and modify it if you would like to. Linux happens to be written in a programming language called C. So if you can program in C, you can write stuff for Linux. Different distributions. Linux is an operating system, but there's different versions of Linux. Because it's open source, it's been rewritten by different people over time. So you might recognize Red Hat or Debian or Ubuntu as different versions of Linux. Fair enough, there's even more besides that. I think the ones you'll probably see the most will be Debian and Ubuntu, but they're all about the same. They're all there to do the same thing anyway. So if you're looking at Linux, you've got to look at your interface. You've got your graphical user interface, which you might be used to because you guys will be used to using Windows. There's also the command line interface where you type in your commands. And the image shown on the screen is a command line interface for Ubuntu. And of course, that's the sort of thing that we'll be showing you on the course. How to use the command line interface, what commands to put in, and how to do things like manage files, folders, things like that. Chapter 2, Operating Systems. So what does an operating system do? As you can see there, it says it manages your hardware and software and also allows your applications to run. Allows your user to interact with the hardware and software that you have in front of you. So if you look at it from this perspective, you've got your user at the top, You've got the software, including the operating system, in the middle, alongside your system software and your applications. Hardware at the bottom, it means the user can use the computer. All of it. Different manufacturers of operating systems: Windows, Linux, and then Mac OS for Apple computers. They're all operating systems for different machines. And then different roles of operating systems. You can get client operating systems, you can get server operating systems. That will get looked at later on in the course. If you want more information on that for the time being, I just suggest that you have a quick look on Google. I'm sure you'll be able to find out all the information that you need for the time being. So there you go, Linux as an operating system. We said earlier on that it gets everywhere. So it could be on your PC, it could be on your phone, it could be on your smart TV, or it could be in an embedded system. Again, if you've not heard of the term embedded system before, I invite you to just put it into Google and see what you find. Working with Linux, well, first thing you'd have to do, like any other operating system, would be to install it, which we'll have a look at another day, I think. Then log in, have a look at the graphical user interface, and then start to work with a command line interface. Command line interface is a simple text input system for entering commands or scripts. The Linux CLI is called terminal, and of course that's the sort of thing that we'll be showing you as we go through the course. What does it look like? It looks like that. A place to type in your commands. And we'll go through the whole idea about what the command line interface looks like and how it works. That'll be one of the things that we'll look at in the next video that we'll do, and the work that we'll look at in chapter 5. Linux runs applications. And applications make requests to the kernel, and in return they receive resources such as memory, CPU, and disk space. And the kernel also abstracts some complicated details away from the application. And if you want to know what that means, have a look at that last sentence, that last bullet point on that particular slide. Again, what does an operating system do? It allows your user to interact with your applications, the hardware, and of course, what's the kernel? It's the core, that is to say, the heart of the operating system. Servers, yep. Clients, yep. Have a look. Because you might have heard of a web server or an email server or a file server or a cloud server or a database server or an application server. There's many different sorts, and of course that's the sort of thing that you'll study as you go further into your course. Because the other thing that you'll find is you get client operating systems, and of course this is the thing that you guys are probably going to be a lot more used to using. For example, the Windows machine that you've probably got in front of you right now, or the Linux machine that we'll have set up so that you guys can start interacting with it. What else have we got? Well, you get tools, applications in the form of tools. The Linux terminal would be an example of a tool. You could also say that something like, for example, performance monitoring software would be a tool, or even antivirus. People use the term utility software, tools, utilities, it's all pretty much the same sort of thing. These are things that enable you to actually interact with the more technical side as opposed to the user side of the client operating system thing. When you get involved with installing and using Linux, you would install something like Ubuntu or Debian. But what you actually do is you install the Ubuntu or the Debian package. And the package is the kernel plus all the tools, plus all the utilities, plus all the various bits and pieces in one, if you like, singular download. That's why they call it a package. The whole idea about package management is if you need to download updates, it just makes things easy because you can run the whole thing on autopilot. And of course, if you're dealing with an operating system or software, you do want to use the latest versions because it's reckoned to be more secure. You get better functionality. Package management enables things like the downloading of operating system updates to be done automatically. If you want to do it manually, you can. There's some commands that you might use if you're going to do that. But things like antivirus as well. Leave it on automatic and then just make sure that it runs itself. It's probably the easiest way to deal with it. As we've kind of already said, or it's already been noted anyway, C is the programming language that's used for writing Linux. C changed over time into C++ and C++. Different versions are pretty much the same thing. But also there's things like Java and JavaScript. That's another sort of programming language. And the one that you guys will probably learn on your course, which is Python. So you really need to be able to write programs, I think, if you want to work in the world of IT. It's just one of those fundamental skills that you need. And another thing that you might want to have a look at is different sort of code that allows you to be able to write web pages as well. Nonetheless, though, if you're working with Linux and you actually want to deal with some open source programming, you better learn how to program, and over time, you better learn C by the looks of it. Linux and security. If you're going online, use the browser security features. Use HTTPS as opposed to HTTP. Be aware of viruses. Keep your passwords to yourself. And be aware of different sorts of authentication, which is proving who you are when you log in, usernames and passwords, etc. Have a look at two-factor authentication if you've never heard of it before. Linux does feature plenty of security. It's reckoned to be more secure than Windows, and again, that's the reason why a lot of people tend to use it, especially for servers. The cloud. Bunch of server packages available online. I'll not read this slide out to you, but if you're not sure what the cloud is, it's functionality provided by servers, and many of those servers are Linux, which is why it would get talked about in the Linux Essentials course, Chapter 3. Have a look at what's on that there slide, and if you're not sure what the cloud is, again, you could always Google it and see what sort of features and functionality is out there on the cloud. Let's have a look at the next slide. Why do people use the cloud? There's some reasons. Chapter 4. Open source software and licensing. Just got a few more slides to look at. But of course, if you're looking at open source, the first thing that comes up is the whole idea of this open source referring to source code. And of course, the source code is the code that you write, probably in C, when you want to write your operating system or your kernel, if you want to build one for yourself. Now, the open source philosophy is that users have the right to obtain the software source code, and they can rewrite their own version of an operating system. That's where you get so many different sorts of packages. Compare that to something like Microsoft, which is closed source. There, you can buy the operating system, but you cannot rewrite the code. Again, it's just a different way of looking at it. The thing is, though, it's because Linux is open source, it's developed by different people. There's a community of programmers and developers all over the world working together to try to make the operating system, that is to say Linux or Linux variants, as good as they could possibly be. That's part of the open source ethos, to make things good by sharing information and best practice in a community. So what happens? Well, you got this source code, so who owns it? Well, Linus Torvalds, I suppose. But the whole idea about this licensing thing, it's like how, if something's free to give away, How do you make money? Well, this is something that's probably worth discussing now, actually. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. Well, next couple of slides, I should say. We'll have a look and we'll see what's there, what it can tell us. So there's this whole idea about licensing for this stuff. Now, as I was saying, Linux is actually owned by Linus himself, but he's placed the code under a license called the GNU General Public License version 2, and it means that you can gain access to the source code and change it as long as you keep the changes beneficial to everybody. Now, the concept of this being free as well, maybe we should have a look and see what that is all about. But nonetheless, though, let's have a look at this concept here. Free Software Foundation. Free does not refer to the price necessarily. You can still sell it and make money. It's free because you have the freedom to share, to study, and to modify the underlying source code. So how do people make money out of this software if it's free? Well, see what the next slide says. It says about different ways of dealing with licensing. Creative Commons for one. Now, I'm going to go on to the next slide in a minute, but if you want to pause this and read that content or Google Creative Commons licensing, you should have a look and see what's going on with that. But nonetheless, on this final slide, it does talk about how you might be able to make some money from the work that you do develop in your operating system if you would like to. Some companies, for example, sell warranties and support as a way of making money. For example, the Wireshark package, free to download, but if you want to use it in business, and of course plenty of businesses do use it, they don't pay for it, but they do pay for the support. But that allows the people that write the Wireshark program, which is a packet sniffer program, not necessarily, should we say, an operating system, but nonetheless the idea is the same. It allows them to make money from their product so that they can continue to develop and make other products. So, suffice to say, what we've done there is we've had a look at Linux chapters 1, 2, 3 and 4 from the NetAcad website. What we've tried to do is try to just keep things a little bit shorter in terms of the time that you might spend on this and the amount of reading that you might have to do. So I've condensed a lot of information for the 4 chapters basically into something that hopefully will take us about 20 minutes to go through. Obviously, I'm going to invite you guys, if you have any further reading or anything or studying that you want to do, to go back to the NetAcad Linux Essentials course and go through the content. But nonetheless, what we've looked at today was a brief synopsis of some of the main points in the Linux Essentials NetAcad course, chapters 1, chapters 2, chapters 3, and chapters 4. Okay, I hope you found that useful. My cat's just come in to say hello. Alright, Puss. So yeah, I'm going to go and give my cat some fuss. You guys have a look through this material and make sure that you're increasingly comfortable with what Linux is, so that when we start looking at things in a bit more of a hands-on practical way, we can start learning commands and using Linux to actually do the things that we would like it to do. Manage folders, manage files, and all of that sort of thing. Okay, thanks for taking the time out to have a look at this. See you on the next video.